Hello, everyone. Thank you for checking out this episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny. I'm here with Matt. I'm here with Scott from the Classic Comic Collector. And we have our new contributor, Peter. Welcome to the team. Today, in this Game Masters panel, we're going to talk about games of exploration. So I will pass this to Matt, and we will begin the discussion.
Okay, so exploration has been a part of RPGs from the very beginning. In fact, in this game, Dungeons & Dragons Basics, the character sheet has a section for places explored. When it gives examples of types of adventures, scenarios they're called, the first example they give is exploring the unknown. And in fact, the first starter module included with the box set was In Search of the Unknown. Later, it became Keep of the Borderlands, but first it was In Search of the Unknown. So the game was designed around what we would call the dungeon crawl. Get all your adventures together and you crawl through a dungeon. You're exploring a dungeon. In 1980, when the D&D Expert set came out, they introduced wilderness adventures, what would become called hex crawls, based on the battle maps people used. And the book gave tips on designing the wilderness, mapping the wilderness, exploring it, using wandering monsters. There were rules for getting lost. There was some GM advice on running hex crawls. Mm-hmm. Their basic advice here was don't be a slave to what you rolled on the random chart. And the basic set involved a sample wilderness adventure. So that's what we would call the hex crawl. Later, we got something called a point crawl, which you see in games like Ultraviolet Grasslands. A point crawl is like a hex crawl, except instead of your characters wandering around in the wilderness from hex to hex, they move from point of interest to point of interest. So there's less time spent in the middle. If you're starting out at the small village and the next place you end up is the volcano, the game just kind of speeds you along there. So that's called a point crawl. So that's a basic idea of a game of exploration. They've shown up in all sorts of different games. But I'm interested to hear what you guys think. What, in your opinion, is an exploration game, and what do you enjoy about them?
Well, I think what makes exploration games different from like other types of role-playing is that it's not as story-driven, at least in my opinion. So when I say about that is that I'm not talking about like, so some adventures are put together because of either political reasons or something going on in town that you're trying to solve. When I think of games exploration, I'm thinking about, okay, I have a dungeon ready to play. Who's going to go down there and try to find treasure and possibly die over and over again for it? That's what I think about exploration treasure adventures, where you're going down there and you're trying to solve through riddles, avoid traps, fight the toughest monsters, so you can get your ring of power or some other item.
Peter, what about you?
Basically the same, but I tend to stray towards being more like I guess character oriented when it comes to like exploration games. And the way that I will usually approach it is I will like ask my players like, okay, what kind of things do you want to do? Like, what do you want to see kind of when I do an exploration game? So I kind of put it like the ball's kind of in their court. I know that there's like a really popular style of play called West Marches that's kind of like this. And I kind of do something similar. I will usually make it like Emmanuel was just saying right now that it's less story driven, and I agree with that. I think that exploration games tend to be more character driven, so it's tied in with maybe the character's backstory or the group's backstory. In games like GURPS, where you have like advantages and disadvantages, you might tie in their advantages or disadvantages into the storyline, like why they're exploring. Enemies is one of my favorite. Like if somebody like has an enemy, I love making it like, okay, yeah, so at the end of this dungeon or at the end of this, this whole thing is this person that you're looking for, or it just so happens that this is a guy who's connected to the guy, kind of, type of thing, so that's how I tend to go about it. It's like what I call direct engagement, which is, with the players, with the player characters pretty much.
What about you, Scott?
Well, it's interesting. For me, just piggybacking on what they were saying, what Peter was just saying, when it comes to dungeon crawling, I think you can make it character driven. I do think you can also make both dungeon crawls and the hex crawls you're talking about, sort of the outdoor exploring, into story driven, but it puts a much bigger burden on the dungeon master. I just got a couple examples from our gameplay that I remember very distinctly. In terms of a character driven, we did an adventure where we're actually going through the map from Keep on the Borderlands with a group of characters that we all had dreams, and we showed up there. But my character was specifically looking for a person. So I was looking for this child that I was supposed to be keeping watch over that had been kidnapped, and I thought she was in this dungeon. So it was a very sort of story character driven exploration of the dungeon, and the other characters all had their own reasons for exploring the dungeon as well. So that's a very character driven exploration. But on the flip side, I remember a game we played where we were part of a group on these ships that we went to this new continent, and we were trying to establish like a colony there. And so there's a whole open continent of unexplored areas that we had to literally go out and explore and map, and we would come into contact with different civilizations and races and monsters and whatever we found there. And that's something where the dungeon master can plant all sorts of different seeds for storylines, and then just based on which ones we happen to run into as we explore, can then sort of develop those out from there. But it does create a bigger burden initially on the dungeon master to plan out like all these potential adventures that you may not even actually get to depending on where they go.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I don't know if it's necessary, but just to clarify to the viewers, I was just using the map from the Keep of the Borderlands. We weren't playing Keep of the Borderlands. I'm just lazy and recycle old maps. So.
I think everyone does that. As a matter of fact, Emmanuel and I were talking about that last night because we were talking about I like to create my own stuff, but that takes a lot of work, and so you end up just having to use modules, but the whole reason they're called modules is because they are modular. You
Exactly.
basically use the parts that, okay, this will fit, and I can use this city map, or I can use this dungeon map, but you're not actually playing that adventure. I've done that a lot. So yeah. It's not lazy at all. It's called ingenuity.
So following up, Scott makes a nice segue. How do you run a game of exploration? What do you do to facilitate that? And I'm just to pick up on something that Scott said. That is exactly how I run the game. I try to sprinkle the game with just enough information to, one, whet the players' appetites, and two, give me something to improvise if they go in that direction. But I don't map out everything. I don't fully develop everything because I can't. I don't have that kind of time. And it's also really heartbreaking to spend 2 days on a castle and they at the last minute they decide to go over there. Mm-hmm. They don't go there. So I make just enough information to whet their appetite, and if they go there, I kind of improvise my way through the end of the session, and then between sessions I will quickly fill in the details of where they are. So I'm really kind of just filling in the map one step ahead of the players.
Right.
Which by the way is something you don't want to tell the players.
Yeah.
They will have this illusion that you've created this entire continent for them, and you just kind of smile and nod, and you let them have that. Let them think that you've created an entire world, and really what you have is a little fog of war that's following them around, and you're just ahead of them.
Mm-hmm. If I could just jump onto that. There was one game that I remember very clearly, one of the first ones that I was DMing for a group back in the day, where I had planned out this gigantic dungeon, and I had made all these maps with like 120 rooms, and I had all the encounters and everything very detailed. And there was one part where a stairwell went down there, and I hadn't gotten to that part yet. And the group managed to go directly right past all of the other rooms, made all the choices to go right down the stairwell into the area that I had mapped, bypassed 100 rooms I had planned out, and I had to just make stuff up. And if I was doing that now, what I would almost do is design 100 rooms and then, but not put them in a particular order. So whenever they go into the next room, I can just pick one of those rooms, like a modular sort of like dungeon, and slap it down there.
Yeah.
And that would, like, I just, in retrospect, if I had just taken room 35 and moved it to where room 140 was supposed to be, no problem. But in the moment, I hadn't planned for that, and I was like, what am I supposed to do? I didn't plan this part out.
Yeah. Yeah.
In situations like that is when I actually, because I tend to stay away from using random encounter tables. Like usually I know, like I usually have like a basic storyline set up, and I know like where I want things to go. If the players go somewhere else, that's when I'll use random encounter tables, you know? So it's like if they veer off, then it's like, okay, yeah, this is where, you know, I guess I'll like Scott just said, make things up. But I tend to not like make things up. I tend to, like I said, I use that's when I use the random encounter tables, you know, and I treat it like even if they're in a city, if they decide to say go to another part of the city that I hadn't planned on, I treat it almost like wilderness, you know, kind of, you know, so kind of like what I do is like let's say like in a massive city like New York, right, which is kind of like cities within cities. I have a campaign that I'm putting together that's like set in New York City's Chinatown, you know, and I know what's going on in there, so I kind of like treat Chinatown like that's the town, so to speak, you know, and then everything outside of Chinatown, you know, is wilderness, and that's where I'll use my random encounter tables, and you know, I might like, you know, have like plot threads. Usually I have like something like a B plot. Like my B plot is usually like my exploration,
Okay.
you know, plot. You know what I'm saying? So it's like if they go that way, then okay, yeah, then we're exploring now, you know.
I just want to add from my personal experience and kind of what you call it, going by what Scott and Peter have said already. So Tomb of Annihilation, which is the spiritual successor to Tomb of Horrors. I really like this adventure because at the later half deals directly with the tomb, and everything about the tomb is about the tomb. So it's great for game masters and dungeon masters to focus on this setting very well. I didn't have to worry about any changes that the characters might have done. You know, like if they want to go this way or away, it didn't matter because everything led back to the tomb. So if they veered away, it just helps them find a better solution to the riddles and passageways that they need to go to get to the end. The one I had the biggest trouble with is this one. Used to be known as Undermountain, and now it's known as the Dungeon of Mad Mage. And what I don't like about it is that there's so many side quests in this dungeon. It's distracting because then I've had too many times where players wanted to go in many different avenues. For example, in one of the levels, there's a way they could go to the Undercity of Waterdeep, which is there's no maps or any encounters for it at all. It's just there's a passageway there, and of course when they see the fact that there's these like rogue guilds around this mega dungeon where there should be nothing but monsters there, they ask questions like, okay, where did they come from? And then when they realize they come from this Undercity, they're like, okay, maybe we should veer over there. Maybe we can find some magic items or find some NPCs to talk to. And I'm like, okay, I gotta figure a way to make that not exist anymore. So to veer everything back to the dungeon. So I think really important for dungeon makers out there to just try to keep the goal focused. Too many side quests, I think, could really hurt the adventure, unless, of course, you're prepared for that in some way.
If you're running a game of exploration, a couple of things could help. One would be to use a game or to import some travel rules, some rules that actually deal with the journey. Supplies, logistics, that sort of thing. How detailed do you want to get? Depends on the kind of game that your group wants. Mm-hmm. And you know, I know a lot of people are turned off by any sort of logistics, but on the other hand, it does allow your characters to make meaningful choices about things. They can't just go forever; they'll run out of food. If they find some treasure, they have to decide what they're going to take and what they're going to leave. They have to deal with the weather, and they have to make interesting choices about how visible they're going to be when they're traveling. What's it like? Are there bandits in this area? Are the roads pretty secure? What kind of monsters are there? That sort of thing. So I think some sort of travel rules would be helpful in whatever game you're using. Another thing I like to do is I love random charts, not necessarily to determine exactly what I'm going to do, but to kind of provide inspiration. Usually what ends up happening is I roll on some random charts and then I ignore some of what I rolled. Like, oh, well, I rolled a 4. Actually, it would have been more interesting if I rolled a 5. Why do I do that? Because, I mean, no one's watching you. No one, it doesn't matter if you change things. A good set of random generators for ruins or cities or, even just weather or encounters or planets, because exploration games can be space based.
Mm-hmm. Oh, big time, big time.
Games that are all about exploration. The other thing I think is useful in an exploration game is to reward exploration. So both in and out of character. So out of character, of course, you can give experience points for it. You might want to change that. They might actually gain experience points for discovering something interesting or something about the setting. In character, they can, the explorations can actually help the characters, right? They can find treasure, right? They can find knowledge. They can find fame, right? If you're actually playing explorers, or let's say you're actually playing a group of cartographers who are out to find the Northwest Passage. If you discover that and you come back with the maps, you're famous. So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say the game rewards exploration.
Right. No, I think also along the lines of like what I was saying before about tying in the characters' backstories, you can advance their backstory. You know what I'm saying? Also, that could be a reward in itself. You know, and also it keeps them engaged because it's personal, so to speak. This has to do with them. So the further along they go, they're getting closer to, the guy, whoever he is, whatever it is that he did, they're getting closer and closer to that person or to that thing that they're seeking, that's central to their character.
Yeah.
So that could be a reward also.
There's one specific thing that I wanted to bring up and get your opinions on. I have seen and played games where the GM shares power with the players about what's going to happen. Like I've played in games where before we explored the haunted forest, the GM says, okay, each of you name one true thing about the forest and I'll work it into the game. So I've seen mechanics like that where I've seen games where the GM makes up everything. I've seen games where the GM and the players work together to make up stuff. And I've seen games where the game makes it up. The whole thing is rolling on charts. And I'm curious which method you like and why.
I like the whole the GM making things up, and that's probably because I'm a control freak, but so but I also like to discuss I've gotten more into the habit of trying to discuss with my players, like, okay, like, what are you interested in? What do you want to see? And that kind of a thing, like what kind of or like I'll have like usually my world is fleshed out because I'm really into world building, which, ends up in a situation where I end up not playing a lot because I'm too busy world building. I get caught up in that a lot. But usually what I'll have is like my world, and then I will show my players, okay, this is my world. This is what's going on. What kind of things are you interested in? What kind of campaign do you want to play? Is how I usually go about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think for me, I think I'm a lot like Peter. I'm also a bit of a control freak when it comes to the game. Like to me, it's very important I keep things balanced. So I always have to watch out for that. Because sometimes players will say something outrageous as an idea. I'm like, okay, let's see how can I work this in, so that it doesn't impede the other players' ability to have fun.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
I think what I like to do sometimes is that, like, so let's say I have a mystery. I try not to have a solution that's not bendable is not the right word. Not flexible enough. So that I'll say, like, I'll give a scenario. I'll say, okay, there's a box that's missing in a house, and there's three bodies, and this gives us these things, and there's like a dagger and a staff randomly, a broken staff in the middle of the floor, and then I kind of let the players kind of piece together what happened, and then see if they can solve themselves. And the reason why I do that a lot, because I've noticed that when I have like a really good mystery in mind, and then I have the players play it, and I've noticed this, I'll use the same scenario like 3 times with different players, and each one tries to solve it differently, and 2 times you just couldn't get it. So I realized that for in those type of instances, I try to be flexible with what the conclusion might be.
How about you, Scott? Who do you like to determine what's up there?
The dungeon master is basically the answer, and I actually prefer that as a player as well. With the caveat that as a dungeon master, I want to be in communication with my players, maybe not in the moment of doing the adventure, but beforehand, as to what their objectives are, like what they want, what their characters want, but what they also want to get out of the game, and then plan an adventure with that in mind. But for me, it's difficult to have these sort of games be sort of a democracy, because I know, and I think, Matt, you're well aware of this, a lot of the games that we've played, our characters in our groups consistently end up having totally different objectives from each other, and the groups often completely fall apart almost immediately as a result. And so having a dungeon master to sort of arbitrate and decide what's going to happen makes that at least possible to play a game when you've got players going in a bunch of different directions. So that's sort of a thing where, as a player, I want the dungeon master to sort of have the control over it. I don't want this lunatic over here across the table from me dictating what we're doing in the game,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it's also a good idea for when you have players like that like hijack the game, so to speak. Basically have things like on a time limit, and so it just turns into a thing of like, oh well, the princess is dead, dude, because you went off and decided that that you wanted to do your own thing, and so now they got to deal with the fallout from that because they didn't succeed in their mission. That's usually how I mitigate that kind of thing happening. Like, people know, like, okay, yeah, don't mess around too much, because Pete will like drop the sky on us. It's usually what'll happen.
Yeah. On the opposite end, dungeon masters should know the pulse of their gamers, like know where story pulses, like what their interests are. So if you're playing like a hack and slash game, but you notice that your players tend to want to do like more political stuff, like want to know what's going on behind the scenes, maybe try to make, instead of going against the other kingdom and trying to destroy them, they want to actually work it out politically and with social skills and roles and things like that. Then definitely shift toward that. If you're trying to do a game of exploration, especially if there's mystery behind it, definitely I would say let your players know ahead of time, just so that if you weren't prepared for that, then you could be ready.
I try to make more than one game. Like, I try to have like more than one like possible campaign that we can play, and with different levels of like control, so like I'll have something that like, okay, yeah, this is more plot oriented, so it's kind of like on rails, and then you have something that's more sandbox, and then something that's completely open where you can do whatever you want, and I'll let them choose from there, and usually it's something in the middle. It's usually something sandboxy, but yeah, that's how I usually do it, is like say, okay, these are your choices of what you can play and stuff, and go from there.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that I prefer it when the GM determines what people are going to discover. And I prefer that both as a GM and as a player. Now, as a GM, what I love about a game of exploration is twofold. One, we've touched on before, is the freedom, right? It's a game that doesn't really provide a storyline, but rather hundreds of hooks and possibilities. And I don't know where the game's going to go. It depends on where the players go. So I love that. And I also love the surprise of that, because when you're the GM, your surprises come from the players and the dice. And so I like a setting that allows them to move around. So I'm surprised by where the players are going to go in the dice. So I use a lot of random charts. But I don't like the surprise of the players telling me what's going on. But on the other side, as a player, I agree with Scott that I prefer it when the GM determines what's happening, because it's a game of exploration. Exploration, by definition, means I don't know what's out there. I'm going to find out. And if I tell you what's out there, it's not really a surprise. Right. So it lacks verisimilitude when the players determine what's going on in the next village. But having said that, I think there's a little room for both. So suppose you're coming to the haunted forest. And so instead of asking the players, okay, each of you name one true thing about the forest, you could ask your players, what's a rumor that you've heard about the forest? Each of you give me a rumor that you've heard about the forest, and let the player make that up. And then as a dungeon master, I can decide whether the rumor is true, partially true, or totally false. So that gives the players like this little bit of control. Like, I've heard that, the trees eat you in your sleep. Okay, well, maybe that's just some crazy drunken story, or maybe they do. So yeah.
So everyone, let us know what you like for games when it comes to exploration. Leave them in the comments below, and have a great day. Be safe out there.